How's it going, guys? Randall aka Shizakats here to bring you guys a deck profile on my 5-choice 3-pants Bondary list. This is a deck that I've been working on since the JP release of the extra boosters back in mid-2021, and I recently played it in the WGP Regionals and Nationals. It's widely regarded as the current meta build for Bondary, and today I'll be giving you guys an in-depth look at how the deck aims to work and my thoughts on the card choices. I'll also be doing a small section at the end detailing some of the changes that you could potentially make for English, as there are some JP exclusive promos in this deck that will change the numbers a little bit. Also, before we get started, I gotta give a shout out to the sponsor of this video, NovaTCG. You can check out their Weiss Schwarz online shop and blog by going to novatcg.com. Without them, this video would not have been possible. Now, onto the deck profile. For the level spread, I'm running 18 level 0s, 9 level 1s, 6 level 2s, and 9 level 3s. And for the color spread, we're on 20 yellow, 29 blue, and 1 red, with no green cards. Blue has extremely high overall quality with a lot of cards that we absolutely want to be running, but this means less room for yellow. Since our yellow count is a bit on the lower side, we will want to prioritize getting it into our level zone at our earliest convenience. Next, let's take a look at our climaxes and climax combos. As you've probably noticed, we're not on a normal 4-4 split of climaxes, instead favoring a 5-choice 3-pants line with 1 empty choice. This is an idea that both myself and others in my local group have been trying out a lot recently, not only in Bondary, but in other sets such as Ruby and Mushoku Tensei, specifically when the pants climax is on the level 3. The idea is that choice is an overall better climax to trigger, and since the pants climax is at level 3, we have plenty of time to try and find it before we actually need it, and we still have a chance to trigger pants and pick it up if the opportunity shows up, unlike other climax triggers like gate or choice. At level 1, our combo is the new Nanami choice combo. She's 4500 base, going up to 5500 if you have 2 or more other music characters. On attack, you can discard a music character to look at up to 5 cards from the top of the deck, choose up to 2 music characters from among them, add them to hand, and send the rest to waiting room. This contributes greatly to our first deck mill and lets us turbo towards our first refresh, while filtering towards cards we will need later on in the game along the way. And at level 3, our finisher is the new Mashiro Pants combo. She has 8500 base power and goes up by 500 for each of our other music characters, capping out at 10-5, and also has on-play heal. When her damage is cancelled, if you have the pants climax in the climax area and you have 4 or more other music characters, you can pay 2 and send Mashiro to memory to summon any character from the waiting room. This can be used to summon another copy of Mashiro, which can then in turn potentially use her climax combo as well, letting you chain multiple Mashiros together as long as their attacks keep getting cancelled. Since the combo is on cancel, this means the overall damage ceiling is low, but it has destructive potential if your opponent is already deep into level 3, and not canceling would mean your opponent just straight up loses the game. Now let's run the card by card, starting with our level 0s. Our ideal early game play is the level 0 Nanami runner, sitting at 2k base. She gains 1500 power if you have 1 or less other characters, and can run to the front left slot at the start of the opponent's attack phase. Center Runner is a fairly common ability, but because Nanami runs specifically to the left, she has a niche, unique advantage against opponents' abilities that give power to the center slot character. She falls off past the early game, so she's also our ideal target to send to level zone in order to secure yellow. Our ideal play on turn 2 is the Yukina Riki. She has the standard Riki ability on play, pay 1 and clock the top card of your deck to search your deck for a level 1 or lower character. Her second effect reads, during this card's battle, when damage taken is cancelled, you may return this to hand. This sometimes results in a random +1, and potentially can go into a +2 as it allows you to replay Yukina from hand and reuse her Riki ability. It's not something that you ever plan for, but sometimes the random extra free card can make a world of difference, and the Riki ability helps contribute greatly to our early game consistency. As both the Nanami and Yukina are our most important cards to see at level 0, we max each of them at 4 copies. Next is the Tsukushi Fukajiro from the Morphonica trial deck. She is a vanilla Fukajiro, letting us get a discard outlet, dig towards mid to late game options, as well as an additional way to mill. I think it's important to run 3 copies in this deck as additional ways to get climaxes out of hand, since the level 1 Nanami combo cannot discard climaxes for her cost. For our back row utility at 0, I actually only run 2 cards. Normally this would be somewhere around 4 to 6 back row slots, but we run additional back row at level 1, so we're only running 2 slots at level 0. The Tsukushi Brainstorm is a rest self-search brainstorm for music trait, the first time we've seen this in BanG Dream. Her second ability is what, in my opinion, really secures Tsukushi's spot in this deck, specifically over the Rimi Brainstorm, which is her main competitor. Act ability, discard 2 cards and send herself to Waiting Room. Choose one character from Waiting Room with level equal or lower than my level, and summon it to stage. This essentially lets you convert hand directly into stock at a 1-to-1 ratio if you bring out a level 3. It lets you bring out level 3s without using any stock. This is more useful than it seems at first, and requires a bit of context on the game flow in order to fully understand, so we'll revisit this card later. The rest of the level 0 line is one of utility slots. The Aya Drop Salvage is a PR, and is a functional reprint of the Saya Drop Salvage from the original BanG Dream set, so you can just run that one if you have it. It's a solid card that also gives us some free mill option if needed. The level 0 Yukina is another PR and is a functional reprint of the Choo Choo level 0 from BanG Dream Volume 2. However, unlike the Aya Drop Salvage, running this Yukina over the Choo Choo is actually optimal for reasons I'll explain when we get to the level 3 cards. The costless hand fix is very helpful, similar to the Tsukushi Fukujiro, as it gives us an additional way to get climaxes out of our hand since the Nanami combo cannot. Additionally, this also gives us some extra information with the top check, which can sometimes be very helpful. Next, we have the Rui Climax Swapper. On play, she can pay 1, discard a climax to salvage a climax, and also on play has a mandatory mill 2, and if she mills a level 0 character, she can side attack without soul penalty for the rest of the turn. While this ability's usage is rather niche, and is usually just another option for free mill 2, this can sometimes be very helpful to play around memory kick backups, which are one of Mashiro's potential counters, since she needs 4 or more other music characters on the board in order to combo, as well as playing around potential anti-damage or rest counters. The Hagumi Jinsu is a very powerful option to have when playing the Nanami level 1 combo. When placed on stage from hand, you can clock the top card of your deck and then discard a card and search your deck for a yellow climax. Then you get to give one of your characters 1k power until the end of the turn. This profile was originally designed around Hello Happy World, which at the time of release was the only BanG Dream deck to have a significant amount of yellow. But now that Morphonica exists, this card can see a lot more usage with the ability to grab their climax as well. Additionally, as a last resort option at level 3, you can sometimes combo the Hagumi and Rui together, searching a yellow climax with Hagumi and then using the Rui to swap it for the Pants climax. The last level 0 I run is a single copy of the Kanon level 0 from Girls Band Party 1. This is a powerful card for resource allocation, as she can send herself to stock as cost for her act ability without resolving the actual effect to summon a 1/1 Hagumi. Additionally, she gives a free top check on play, and combos very well with our level 1 back row Toko, which requires resting 2 characters in order to use her act ability. Moving on to the level 1s, we have our Toko Changers. The first of the two is an on-attack Shimakai buffer, giving 500 times the number of my other music characters to one of my other music characters. Thus, she's able to give a buff up to 2k power to one of my other characters. This is especially important at level 2 if our opponent is representing a very strong defensive board, as we want to be able to have our Choo Choo and Pareo be able to live even if our opponent has counters ready, so that we can have our Choo Choo and Pareo leverage their high power on the defensive as well. The other of the two changers is a back row support, which I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the level 0 Kanon. She gives Global 500 to all of our other music characters and has an act ability that lets us get a plus. Pay 1 and rest 2 characters, mill 2, combine the levels of the 2 milled cards, and salvage a character whose level is equal or lower than the sum. This Toko is a mainstay in our back row, reliably giving us advantage compared to the randomness of a Brainstorm. This does mean less mill overall, since this ability only mills 2 compared to a Brainstorm's 4, but the Nanami combo's high amount of mill can make up for this. These two level 1s can also change to each other for free at the start of our climax phase, which means that we have more reliable access to the back row support, or we can switch out the back row support and into an on-attack buffer if we need more offensive power to secure control of the board. Being able to change to each other at climax phase also means that you can rest them for the cost of the back row mill 2 and salvage effect, and then change them into their counterparts, which will come into play standing, ready to attack. I run the buffer at 2 copies and the support at 3, with an emphasis on finding the support reliably, while also having additional yellow that can be sent to level zone if needed, since the yellow in this deck is on the lower side. Moving on to the level 2, we need to talk about our next couple cards as a package, the 3-2 Choo-Choo early play heal and the 2-1 Pareo. This is an extremely powerful duo that allows you to take absolute control of the board during the mid game. It should be your priority to bring out multiple Choo-Choos alongside a Pareo, or even multiple Pareos, as this allows you to avoid needing to clock to replenish cards going into the late game. In order to guarantee that you're going to be able to play these Choo-Choos and Pareo at level 2, you do want to keep a watch on your deck state to make sure that you're going to be able to fulfill the early play condition of the Choo-Choo, which is 2 or less climaxes. Missing the early play condition can be devastating towards your game plan and ultimately results in a significantly less optimal mid and late game. I did an entire video on this duo of cards, which I'll link in the description if you guys want to check that out. As far as the counts go, I run 4 copies of the Choo-Choo early play and 3 copies of Pareo in order to maximize the potential to see them. It's pretty important to have the option to go into double Pareo, even if 1 copy gets stuck in stock, so I went up from 2 copies in my WGP regional list to 3 copies for my nationals list. Rounding out the level 2 line are 3 counters. I chose to run 3 because I wanted to be able to have 1 in hand simply to defend the board, while also being able to grab additional free fresh counters to potentially use for the free refresh utility. So I run 2 copies of the Arisa free refresh counter as my choice list card. Free refresh counter is an amazing option to have, as you can always pick this up off of a triggered choice climax. Additionally, because of the deck's ability to operate on very low resources in the late game, you can usually use the free fresh ability quite liberally if you need to, without needing to worry too much about missing out on the 3 stock that you pay for the cost. As long as you stay at level 2 and hold on to your board, you can just attack 3 times every turn, and if you trigger clean, you can just chill, and if you trigger choice, you have this as an option to pick up. The last counter I run is a one of Yukina 3K memory kit counter. This is another functional reprint, this time of the 2-1 Tae counter from Volume 2. Similar to the Yukina level 0 PR, this is actually an optimization over Tae. So the reason that the level 0 Yukina and level 2 Yukina counter are optimal is because of the Yukina stock swap, which coincidentally is our last level 3. When placed on stage from hand, we can discard 2 Roselia trait characters, look at the top 2 cards of our deck, rearrange them in any order, and then stock swap our opponent. As you can see, requiring Roselia trait discards makes the level 0 and level 2 Yukinas better than their Choo-Choo and Tae counterparts, which do not have Roselia trait. Our Roselia trait in the deck is already quite low, with just 4 Yukina Rikis apart from the stock swap itself, and the PRs bump the Roselia count up a little bit to make having the discard cost for stock swap more consistent. Typically, the way I want to play going into level 3 is you want to hold 1 Roselia card alongside the Yukina stock swap, such as the Yukina 2-1 counter, which you would want to have to defend your level 2 board anyway. And then if the situation comes up where you would want to go for stock swap, you can use the Toko back row effect, pay 1, tap 2, and salvage a Yukina Riki. Since they're level 0, you'll always be able to pick it up, and then you can go ahead and stock swap your opponent. It's important to know that if that extra Roselia character in your hand is the 2-1 Yukina counter, you will probably want to exercise restraint on whether or not you're going to be using that to defend the board, or keeping it in hand to potentially use for the Yukina stock swap. Yukina's other ability is a damage scry. When we take damage, we can look at the top card of our deck and either leave it on top or send it to waiting room. And this makes her a very useful ending target for your Mashiro combo turn once you've gone through all of your Mashiro level 3s. So, with the deck out of the way, let's talk about the overall game flow. Throughout the game, you will want to keep track of where your Mashiro level 3s are at all times, as having access to as many copies as possible in the late game is crucial if you want to have an optimal finisher turn. Since Mashiro can loop into herself, you can potentially have all 4 Mashiros attack in a row, followed by an additional attack afterwards, for a total of 7 attacks in a single turn, but this is only possible if you have access to all copies. In your mulligan, the main cards to look for are the Nanami Runner for turn 1, Yukina Riki for turn 2, Nanami Climax combos, and the Climax itself. If you do not have the Climax pre-mulligan, consider also holding the level 0 Hagami so that you can use her effect to grab it from your deck. Since we're running Choice, you will also want to try to get a Soul Trigger into the waiting room in case you trigger an early Choice Climax so you can get value out of that. As mentioned earlier, Nanami Runner is our ideal turn 1 play. If we're going second, it's going to depend on a lot of factors such as whether or not we need our runner to be online based on the rest of our hand, what our opponent played, where they played it, etc. So going second with this deck is a little bit iffy. Another thing you need to think about is whether or not to tri-field on turn 2, for example with a Nanami Runner, Yuki Nariki, and a third attacker, as this will result in Nanami's power being reduced back to its base value of 2000 since you have 2 other characters on stage. Again, this is contextual and depends a lot on what you expect your opponent to be able to play if you are unable to defeat their character due to your Nanami being too low power. At level 1, you basically have one goal and one goal only, and that is to use Nanami combo to turbo yourself towards second deck while picking up pieces along the way. Typically, these are going to be your Choo-Choo early plays and Pareo 2-1s, as well as 2-1 counters to defend them once you get to level 3, so you can prep to take full control of the board starting in your second deck. At level 2, there's a bit of nuance to how you assemble your Choo-Choo Pareo boards. This is going to require a bit of knowledge on your part as to how your opponent can potentially respond to Choo-Choo and Pareo once they're on the board. Choo-Choo is susceptible to anti-change removal bombs since Pareo only prevents reversing by effects, while Pareo is susceptible to bounce. So if your opponent has access to either of those, you will want to take that into account going into your level 2 game. 1 Choo-Choo plus 1 Pareo is the absolute minimum that you'll want to be fielding at level 2, and against decks with access to removal bombs, you will want to prioritize a second copy of Choo-Choo so that if one gets removed, the other one is still there, so Pareo is still 10-5 and still has Hand Encore. Meanwhile, if your opponent has access to bounce, consider prioritizing the second Pareo instead and going for 1 Choo-Choo and 2 Pareo. This way, if your opponent is able to bounce one of the Pareo, the other one is still on board to keep your Choo-Choo at 13k and keep all of her special benefits. If you can get 2 Choo-Choo and 2 Pareo on the board, you're pretty much set in any situation, but that's definitely a high roll in my opinion, and you should not expect to be able to get that every game. Ideally, going into level 3, you are able to create a large damage gap between you and your opponent since you won't need to clock as much, if at all. Meanwhile, your opponent will often be crashing a majority, if not all of their lanes every turn, giving you good damage via direct attacks on the swing back. At level 3, you want to have your Mashiro going for direct attacks, as those give her the highest chance of her damage getting cancelled, allowing you to use the combo in the first place. With Choo-Choo and Pareo constantly opening lanes going into level 3, this shouldn't be too hard. Plan your board based around where your opponent is damage-wise. If they're at 3-3 or higher, you can go with just one copy of Mashiro since her direct attack with Climax will threaten 4 damage, and her combo is guaranteed to go off, or your opponent is dead. If they're at 3-2 or lower, consider fielding 2 Mashiro in the front row instead of just 1. This makes it so that if one Mashiro sticks, the other is now online to chain through the rest of the copies of Mashiro. You're also going to want to take note of your opponent's deck size, as refresh point could potentially be taken into account for your damage calculations and how you want to assemble your board. As far as stock goes, you can full combo through all 4 Mashiros, starting with just 2 stock at the start of your attack phase. Her combo is very cheap, costing only 2 stock per instance, but you're also going to be generating 1 stock every time you attack. Additionally, even if you aren't able to get 2 starting stock to go through the entire combo, there's a chance you hit a choice trigger that can generate a stock along the way. Another important card for playing the level 3 game is the Tsukushi Brainstorm. Her abilities combo very well together, and she can accomplish multiple things at once overall. The Mill 4 from the Brainstorm potentially puts extra copies of Mashiro into the waiting room. The Brainstorm Search can grab Mashiro and add it to hand. And extra copies of Mashiro in the hand can then be discarded to use Tsukushi's other effect, ditching 2 cards and sacrificing herself to summon something from waiting room. This is a big part of the reason why I say this deck's late game is able to operate on very low resources, as the Tsukushi can bring out the Mashiro combo with a 0 stock cost. Additionally, you shouldn't underestimate Tsukushi's usefulness at level 2 either. Using her effect to bring out an additional Pareo can sometimes make a huge difference depending on your matchup. So definitely keep this in your back pocket if you think the second Pareo is worth bringing out, even at the cost of 2 hand for a character that only costs 1 stock. Next, let's talk about some of the cards that I chose not to run, or cards that I ran in previous versions of the build that I do not run now. First is the 3-2 Mashiro from the trial deck. She has an on-attack effect, pay 1, discard 1, Michiru for 3. That is to say, mill the bottom 3 cards of the opponent's deck and burn X, where X is the number of climaxes milled off the bottom. It's an ability that can sometimes be extremely useful, but sometimes detrimental as well if you mill your opponent clean and you missed an opportunity to hit them for a bunch of free damage. Her other ability is a damage scry, similar to the Yukina stock swap, so a lot of people consider her to be the ideal card to have summoned off the last copy of Mashiro combo as part of your ending board. I chose not to run her in favor of making space for a second free fresh counter to bolster my level 2 board, and I also felt that trying to set her up in waiting room as well as the Mashiro combos was a bit too much work, and we also just have the Yukina stock swap as a potential end board target for a damage scry if we are not able to finish off our opponent. The next card I want to address is the 3-2 Arisa Half Fumio from the original Bang Dream set. This is one of the cards on the choose one of 3 list for JP, but I chose to run the free fresh counter instead as it plays better into my game plan of holding a firm grip on the board at level 2 through high power plus counters. Additionally, the Arisa is just not a card that I ever really see myself sculpting for. Typically, I play to maximize Mashiro combo instead, since a full combo can eat through many climaxes if our opponent is already in a lethal range. Additionally, the global 1500 power isn't really useful in a lot of matchups either, since my opponent's board is typically going to be empty when I go for the combo turn, since I'm focusing so much on the level 2 with the defense of the Choo-Choo and Pareo combined with counters. In English, you have the option to run this card alongside the free fresh counter. Personally, I still chose not to run it, but if it's a card that you value the utility of, feel free to put one into your deck. So speaking of cards on the choice list, this deck also does not feature the bread event. As I mentioned earlier on in the deck profile, the overall quality of blue cards in this deck is through the roof, and you also need enough yellow to have a stable level 1 game. We also have the option of using Yukina stock swap in this build instead of bread stock swap, which plays much better with our colors. If you want to try adding bread to the deck, the easiest swap is probably Tsukushi Brainstorm for Rimi Brainstorms, but then you lose the additional utility Tsukushi offers in the late game. Additionally, you can also swap out some of the level 0 utility, such as the Choo-Choo / Yukina PR or the level 0 Kanon, and stick more red utility, such as the Arisa Drop Search, or additional copies of the Drop Salvage. In English, you have the opportunity to run bread alongside both Free Fresh and Arisa, but it still runs into those same problems, so I would personally recommend not running it in English either and just sticking with the Yukina stock swap. For the English version of this build, since you're lacking 2 Roselia characters in the Yukina PRs, I chose to instead run the Choo-Choo version of level 0, while also dropping the Memory Kick counter entirely. I instead chose to run 2 copies of the Sayo Bomb at level 0, one of them instead of the Memory Kick counter, and the second one instead of the level 0 Kanon, and these help keep the Roselia count at 6, not counting stock swap. Sayo Bomb is a useful early game card to maintain advantage, but can also combo well with the Nanami runner. If your opponent tries to play around the Nanami by putting their turn 1 play to their right side, you can respond with the Sayo Bomb, removing their character and simultaneously freeing up your left slot for Nanami to run to. To end off this video, I just want to give a short WGP report as far as my matches. Unfortunately, my WGP results were not the greatest. I went 3-1 at regionals with wins against Hololive, Symphogear, and 8-Gate Quince, with a loss against a good friend of mine playing Saikano. And at Nats, I unfortunately went 2-2, definitely nowhere close to where I wanted to be, with wins against 8 Standby Quince and 8-Gate Quince, and losses to Choice Pants Mushoku Tensei due to some unfortunate luck, aka my Tsukushi Fukujiro milled 4 climaxes. And I also lost to 8 Standby Quince because I honestly misplayed like an absolute monkey multiple times throughout that game. So that one was my bad. I definitely just take that loss and we move on with our lives. So that concludes my 5-choice 3-pants Bang Dream deck profile. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Also want to give one final shout out to the sponsor for this video, Nova TCG, as this would not have been possible without them. Thanks for watching, everyone. This has been Randall, aka Shizukats, and I'll see you next time. Bye.